Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The floor of the cathedral didn't rush up to meet him. The world simply tilted on its axis, dissolving into a kaleidoscope of stained glass and horrified gasps. It wasn't the heat of the unseasonably warm November afternoon that buckled Julian's knees, nor was it the suffocating stranglehold of his silk tie. It was the scent, the overwhelming, territorial pheromones of the alpha standing at the altar, pouring off him in waves of nervous energy. Julian, the head of security, the invisible shadow, the supposed beta assistant, stood 3 feet away from the man he had loved in silence for a decade. He watched Cashin Blackwood take the hand of a woman he didn't love, a woman chosen for her bloodline and her father's shipping empire. And as Cashin said, "I do," a sharp, tearing pain ripped through Julian's lower abdomen, shattering the military-grade suppressants he had been swallowing like candy for weeks. The irony was cruel. He had spent 10 years guarding Cashin's back from assassins, corporate spies, and rival clans. He had taken bullets and broken bones without a whimper. But now, standing as the best man in a ceremony that marked the end of his silent hope, his own body became the assassin. "The ring, Julian," the priest whispered, eyes darting nervously. Julian moved his hand. It trembled. A sheen of cold sweat slicked his pale skin, turning the expertly tailored charcoal suit into a freezing prison. He tried to step forward, to hand over the platinum band that would seal his alpha's fate to another, but his legs were no longer his own. Not now, he screamed internally, his vision blurring at the edges. Asterisk not here. Do not ruin this for him. Asterisk. He bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted copper, trying to ground himself. But then, Cashin turned. The alpha's eyes, usually cold and calculating like shattered obsidian, narrowed as they landed on Julian. Cashin flared, just a subtle, instinctive pulse of dominance asking what is wrong. And that tiny push was the final straw. Julian's scent, bottled up for years behind chemical blockades, exploded. It wasn't the scent of a beta. It was the distinct, intoxicatingly sweet aroma of vanilla, orchid, and distress, the scent of a hidden omega in the throes of a biological crisis. The gasp from the congregation was audible. Julian saw Cashin's eyes widen, shifting from confusion to a primal, terrifying realization. "Julian." Cashin's voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. "I'm sorry," Julian whispered, the words formless shapes on his numb tongue. I'm sorry, sir." Gravity claimed him. He pitched forward, the ring clattering loudly against the marble steps. He expected the hard impact of stone, but it never came. Instead, strong arms, familiar, terrifying, beloved arms, snatched him from the air. The last thing Julian saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was the wedding officiant backing away in horror, and Cashin Blackwood, the future CEO of the Blackwood conglomerate, ripping the ceremonial boutonniere from his lapel to press it against Julian's nose, his face twisted in a mask of absolute panic. The sterile beep of the monitor was the first thing to pierce the fog. Julian kept his eyes closed. If he kept them closed, maybe he was still a beta. Maybe he was still just the efficient, sexless secretary who managed Cashin's schedule and cleaned up his messes. If he kept them closed, maybe he hadn't just exposed himself as a biological liability in front of the entire city's elite. "I know you're awake." The voice was ice and velvet. "Cashin." Julian's heart rate spiked, betrayal flashing across the green line of the monitor, giving him away. He opened his eyes. They were in a private suite at the Blackwood Family Hospital. The windows were tinted, blocking out the paparazzi swarming below, but the room felt suffocatingly small. Cashin was sitting in a leather wingback chair by the bed, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, though the jacket was discarded and the shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like a fallen king, exhausted, furious, and terrifyingly beautiful. "The wedding," Julian croaked. His throat felt like he had swallowed glass. "Cancelled," Cashin said flatly. He didn't move. He didn't blink. "The bride's father pulled her out the moment he smelled you. He accused me of harboring a mistress at the altar. A scandal of the decade." Julian squeezed his eyes shut. "I will resign. I'll draft the statement. I'll take full responsibility. I'll say I was an obsessed employee who—" "Shut up." The The command was soft, but it carried the weight of an alpha's order. Julian's mouth snapped shut against his will. Cashin stood up. The movement was predatory. He walked to the side of the bed, looming over Julian. The scent of burnt cedar and ozone, Cashin's anger, was so thick it made Julian dizzy. 7 years, Julian, Cashin murmured, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. 7 years you've been by my side. You've slept in my office. You've traveled the world with me. You've taken bullets for me. Cashin's hand moved, fingers brushing the hair away from Julian's damp forehead. The touch was gentle, which made it all the more terrifying. And all that time, Cashin hissed, "You were an Omega. You lied to me every single day." "Why?" "Because you don't hire Omegas," Julian whispered, forcing himself to meet those obsidian eyes. "You don't respect them. You see them as bargaining chips, as breeding stock. I wanted to be your sword, Cashin. I couldn't be that if I was this. So you poisoned yourself?" Cashin grabbed Julian's wrist, pulling it up to show the 4-line flushing his system. "The doctors said your blood was toxic. You've been taking illegal suppressants at 3 times the recommended dose. You nearly stopped your own heart. It was necessary. Was it?" Cashin's grip tightened, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Was it necessary to hide him too?" Julian froze. The air left the room. He instinctively tried to pull his hand away, to curl into a ball and protect his stomach, but Cashin held him fast. I don't know what you mean," Julian lied, though the tremble in his voice betrayed him. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Cashin's eyes dropped to Julian's abdomen, concealed beneath the hospital blanket. The blood test confirmed it. "You're 12 weeks pregnant." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the ghosts of a night 3 months ago. A business trip to Macau. A celebration that went too long. Too much whiskey. A suppressor that had failed, or perhaps Julian had forgotten to take it. The memory was a blur of heat and skin, a desperate, feverish encounter that Julian had convinced himself Cashin didn't remember. Cashin had woken up alone. Julian had ensured it. They had never spoken of it. Julian had prayed it was a dream. "I was going to handle it," Julian whispered, shame burning his cheeks. Cashin's expression darkened, shifting from anger to something colder, deadlier. "Handle it? Does that mean what I think it means? You were going to get rid of my heir." "It's not an heir," Julian snapped, the stress finally breaking his composure. "It's a mistake. A liability. You were marrying Elena Vance. You needed that merger to secure the chairmanship. An illegitimate child with your male secretary destroys everything you've worked for. So you decided for me?" Cashin roared. The sheer volume of the voice made Julian flinch. Cashin never yelled. He destroyed people with whispers. To hear him shout was like watching a mountain crumble. "I decided for you," Julian countered, tears pricking his eyes. "I chose your future over my own. I was going to leave after the wedding. I was going to disappear." Cashin stared at him, his chest heaving. The anger was still there, but beneath it, something else was breaking through. Shock. And perhaps fear. "You were going to leave," Cashin repeated, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. "With my child. I thought it was the only way to save you." Cashin turned away, pacing the small room. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying the perfect styling. He looked at the door, then back at Julian. When he spoke again, his voice was terrifyingly calm. "The merger is dead. The Vances have already declared war. The board is calling for my resignation." Julian felt a sob trapped in his throat. "I'm sorry, Cashin. I've ruined you." Cashin walked back to the bed. He sat down on the edge, the mattress dipping under his weight. He didn't look at Julian's face. Instead, he placed his large, warm hand directly over Julian's stomach. Julian flinched, but Cashin didn't pull away. "You didn't ruin me, Julian," Cashin said softly, watching his own hand. "You saved me from a loveless marriage to a viper. But the chairmanship. To hell with the chairmanship," Cashin muttered. He looked up, and for the first time in 10 years, the mask was gone. His eyes were raw, searching. "Do you know why I drank so much that night in Macau?" Julian shook his head slightly. "Because I knew the engagement was coming up. And I looked at you, standing there in that suit, checking your watch, looking so damn efficient and unreachable. And I realized I hated every minute of a future that didn't have you in it." Julian's breath hitched. "You thought I was a beta. You thought I was just an employee. I thought you were the only person in the world who understood me, Cashin corrected. I didn't care about your dynamic. I wanted you. But I thought you were incapable of loving me back. I thought you were just doing a job. It was never just a job, Julian whispered. Cashin's thumb rubbed a soothing circle against the blanket over Julian's abdomen. You tried to kill yourself with those pills to protect my ambition. That is the stupidest, most loyal thing I have ever heard. I'm your sword, Julian reminded him, his voice trembling. No, Cashin said firmly. Not anymore. Cashin leaned in, his forehead resting against Julian's. The contact sent a jolt of electricity down Julian's spine. The scent of cedar softened, wrapping around Julian like a protective blanket, mixing with Julian's own vanilla scent to create something new, something complete. You are not my sword, Cashin murmured against his skin. You are my omega. And you are the father of my child. Cashin, the scandal. Let them talk. Let the board scream. I built this company, and I can burn it down and build it again if I have to. Cashin pulled back slightly, his gaze intense. But I am not letting you go. You are staying here. You are carrying this baby. And you are going to let me take care of you for once. Do you understand? It was a command, but it was also a plea. Julian looked at the man he had worshipped from the shadows. He saw the exhaustion, the fear of loss, and the fierce possessiveness that burned in those dark eyes. For the first time in 7 years, Julian stopped fighting. He stopped calculating the risks. He stopped trying to be the perfect weapon. He let out a long, shuddering breath and nodded. Yes, Alpha. The honorific slipped out instinctively, a surrender to the biology he had fought for so long. Cashin's eyes darkened at the word. He leaned down, capturing Julian's lips in a kiss that wasn't tentative or gentle. It was claiming. It was hungry. It tasted of desperation and a decade of suppressed desire. Julian melted into it, his hands finding their way into Cashin's hair, pulling him closer, the 4 lines swaying with the movement. When they finally broke apart, Cashin stayed close, his lips brushing Julian's ear. Rest now, Cashin commanded softly. When you wake up, we're going to war with the board. But this time, you stand beside me, not behind me. Julian closed his eyes, his hand covering Cashin's hand on his stomach. The future was uncertain. The scandal would be brutal. The enemies were already sharpening their knives. But as he drifted off into the first drug-free sleep he'd had in years, surrounded by the scent of his alpha, Julian Vane knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't be facing it alone. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian finally surrender to his true feelings, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to kill you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,